In this lesson, we're going to learn how to specify numbers that must be excluded from the domain. We're about to talk a lot about rational expressions. And a rational expression is simply a fraction that has a variable in the denominator. And since we know that we can't allow the denominator to be 0, we can't allow the variable to have any value that would make the denominator equal 0. And that's because 0 in the denominator means that the fraction is undefined. So we just want to keep x from taking on any values that would make the denominator equal 0. So domain is just a word for all the values that x can be. And when we find the numbers that x can't be, we're actually finding the numbers that must be excluded from the domain. Here's an example. We're going to find all the x values that have to be left out of the domain for the fraction 4 over x minus 2. Now, of course, if you take just the denominator and figure out what x value would make that equal 0, we know that we can't let x minus 2 equal 0 because then the denominator would equal 0. Well, if we solve that like a little equation, we find out that x cannot equal 2. In this part B example, we have x over x squared minus 1. And again, we cannot let the denominator equal 0. Notice that it doesn't matter what the top equals, but the denominator cannot equal 0. So in this case, because I have x squared, I'm going to factor that denominator. It's a difference of squares, so it will factor into x minus 1 times x plus 1. Now, neither one of these factors can be allowed to equal 0, because if either factor equals 0, the whole denominator will be 0. So we're going to find out that x minus 1 cannot equal 0, and that means x cannot equal 1, and also x plus 1 cannot equal 0, so x cannot equal negative 1. So in this case, we have two numbers that we have to leave out of the domain. And that is all there is to figuring out which numbers to leave out of the domain. You just have to figure out what would make the denominator equal 0, and if there's any factoring to do, just take each factor and set it equal to 0 to find out, or not equal to 0 rather, to find out what you have to leave out of the domain.